What's going on, guys? This is Lior with Compass out of Boston, and I thought I'd make a video talking about the difference in lifestyle between living in the city and some of the suburbs around the Boston area. Now, the reason I decided to make this video, I've had a lot of you guys reach out to me and ask me this exact question, and since I've now lived in both the suburbs, I lived in Newton, and I've also lived now downtown. I live in South Boston currently. I've kind of had the experience of living in both worlds. So I thought I would share with you guys my experiences on, what it's like to live in these two very different areas, both from a lifestyle perspective, going out, things to do, convenience, and just what you can expect from these very different pockets. So hopefully this is helpful for you guys. And with that, let's get at it. What's going on, guys? My name's Lior and I'm with Compass out of Boston. And before we get into the video, two quick things as always, guys. Number one, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, make sure you smash that subscribe button. I put out tons of new videos every single week. And if you're interested in learning about lifestyle and real estate all over Boston and greater Boston area, make sure you subscribe to the channel. That way you'll see all my new videos. And number two, if you guys are thinking about doing anything with real estate around the Boston or greater Boston area, I get like an insane amount of calls from you guys, and each one of them still blows me away, and I still absolutely love it. So if you guys are thinking about making any moves as it relates to real estate around Boston or greater Boston, make sure you hit me up on phone, text, email, Instagram, whatever's best for you, and I will help you out. So with that, as I said, I kind of wanted to do this more of a freestyle video. I've kind of had the experience of living both in the suburbs in greater Boston, as well as actually living in the city. And because so many of you guys kind of really are really trying to balance between these two things as you figure out where to personally move to and live in the Boston area, I thought I would kind of just give you kind of my raw thoughts on these two different pockets. So let's start out with my personal favorite criteria is food, restaurants, bars, drinks, all that good stuff. So with the city, one of the best thing about living in South Boston, right? I mean, that's where I live right now, is you just have amazing access to all of the best restaurants around the city, right? I can easily either drive to or get delivery from basically any place in the South End, Back Bay, North End, Fenway, Kenmore, and there's some amazing restaurants. I mean, I can get just amazing Italian from the North End. I could get some awesome places from the South End. I even have pretty easy access to like Somerville and Cambridge if I really wanted to. So my food selection is amazing. And if you're a foodie or if you eat out a lot and you like to try different things, there's nothing quite like living in the city, right? You kind of just have all the best restaurants right at your disposal. The other thing too to consider, obviously this is probably more important pre-COVID. Hopefully within the next half a year to a year it'll become important again. But I used to love going out for meals, right? Especially like Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. I love going out for dinner around 8, 9, 10 p.m., right? Get dinner, have some drinks with friends, family, whatever. It's just a great time. And obviously restaurants and bars are open way later around, in Boston and downtown. Whereas opposed to in places in Newton, right? When I lived in Newton, don't get me wrong, there were some really great places there as well. The issue I found was, most of them closed by 9 or 10 p.m. So you kind of had to order pretty early. So if that's something that's important to you, obviously keep that in mind. There's definitely a scheduling difference between the suburbs and living in downtown Boston. The one final thing I'll say about this topic is, even though there's a lot of advantages of living downtown that I talked about, the one thing you do need to be ready of if you're gonna live here, food is certainly way more expensive typically in downtown than in the burbs, right? I mean, most of the restaurants and even like just regular cafes that you eat around here will be pretty significantly more expensive than the restaurants and cafes you may eat anywhere in the burbs, right? I mean, I'm comparing prices to Newton, but I've eaten in the burbs all around greater Boston, and I can tell you they're certainly a lot cheaper than eating downtown. So that's something you should certainly consider as well from a budgeting perspective. Number 2 factor I'm gonna talk about is energy. And even post-COVID, I mean, living in the city just comes with a totally different energy than living in the burbs, right? I mean, today, even with COVID and everything, if you walk, go downtown to the Back Bay, if you walk on like Newbury Street or Boylston Street, if you walk around the South End, Copley, anywhere around South Boston, right? If you walk around Castle Island, the beach, West Broadway, East Broadway, there's a lot of people outside today, even with COVID. So in the city right now, even with COVID and everything going on, there's just a ton of people out, ton of energy. That's just really amazing to have. Now, if you maybe have a family or you're someone that just enjoys more peace and quiet, there's definitely nothing wrong with that by any means. I can definitely enjoy my quiet as well. But if you're someone that really prefers that, the suburbs are probably gonna be the better place for you. In Newton where I lived, it was definitely a lot quieter than living in the city. Houses are much more spaced apart. There's just less people packed. Even in like little town or city centers, they tend to be much less packed than obviously anywhere downtown. So if you're someone that doesn't like a lot of people, or you just don't necessarily want that energy, or if you already lived in a big city before and you want that peace and quiet, the suburbs around Greater Boston certainly offer that. Now, going off of that factor number 3 is going to be neighbors. So as I said, in the suburbs, typically you're going to be a lot more dispersed and further away from your neighbors, right? If you live in a single family house, obviously you're not going to be sharing walls with anyone. Even if you live in a townhome in the suburbs or something like that, chances are you're going to have less neighbors than if you were to live downtown, and most likely it's going to be a lot quieter, right? But if you live in the city, most likely you're going to be living in a condo or an apartment, right? You're probably going to be sharing at least one wall with someone else. Depending on the type of condo or townhome that you live in, depending how big the complex that you live in is as well. But I will say this, I mean, overall, the noise level, in living in the city is really not that bad with neighbors. A lot of this certainly also depends on the type of, the type of home you live in. If you're gonna be living in something like a newer construction or recently updated home too, chances are you're gonna hear a lot less noise from your neighbors, right? Because in newer renovations or newer construction, builders have to meet certain code, which usually includes insulation, which obviously dampens the sound between units. Even if you live in an older place, right, that may not necessarily be upgraded, it takes a lot for you to hear your neighbors. Maybe if they like slam doors or like jump up and down for like 20 minutes, maybe then you'll hear them. Sort of like that Geico commercial where they have like the tap dancers, if you've ever seen that. But that's the point. That's the point, right? I mean, it really isn't too bad. I think you'd have to be quite an extreme case for you to really hear a lot from your neighbors. But especially if you're going to be in a newer renovation or newer construction condo or townhome, chances are you're not really going to hear a lot, or at least too much from your neighbors. Now, in terms of the next factor, which is things to do, I think both the city and the suburbs both offer their own kind of distinct features. From we kind of talked about before, from a restaurant, cafe, bar perspective, obviously the city is going to offer probably more in terms of variety from that perspective than most of your suburbs, and they're obviously going to probably have longer hours and stay open later in the night. But living in the city has other really cool things you can do, right? We got awesome festivals and other places that you can hold gatherings and kind of hang out with people. Things that come top of mind is places like the Lawn on D. You have the Boston Common. You've got some really cool places around the seaport. You can do that. You got plenty of parks, which we'll talk about. But basically, you have a ton of different kind of like social gathering places, which is really cool. I mentioned festivals. We certainly have had quite a bit of them pre-COVID, of course. We had some really great seafood festivals downtown, some great craft beer festivals. So stuff like that is just things you'll be able to experience in the city. And from a natural attraction perspective, the city still does offer amenities like that. As I mentioned, there are parks and green space throughout the city that you can find. We do have access to beaches, right? If you go in South Boston, for example, you'll have plenty of beach space. You can go to Castle Island. You know, if you just want to see the water, you can go in the waterfront district in the North End. So plenty of visibility for that as well. And finally, you also have access to things like open markets, which obviously the suburbs do offer, but the city also has that. So for example, in the South End, for example, SOA is a really big market that happens every summer. Again, didn't really happen this summer because of COVID, but in previous years, it happened every single year where they'd have, you know, different artist exhibits, they'd have food trucks come up, and it was just a really cool open market feel. Now, in the suburbs, you certainly have access to a lot of these things. I mean, in the suburbs, you're probably gonna have much bigger access to parks, green space, natural attractions, even things like lakes and ponds, which you don't necessarily get as much around the city. Other things you'll probably get more in the suburbs than in the city. You'll get things like bigger fields. So if that's important, you know, you're certainly going to see that. You'll get like basketball courts, tennis courts, you know, baseball fields, soccer fields, football fields. You're much more likely to see access to that in the suburbs than you are around the city. Also, depending on exactly where in the suburbs you are, you're going to have access to some really large green spaces and reservations. So for example, I've talked about this in my other videos, but up in north by Melrose Stoneham, you have like the Middlesex Fells, which is just an incredible, you know, natural attraction where a lot of people go hiking, you know, throughout the year. I mean, really beautiful. So, you know, in the suburbs, you'll have a lot more of that than in the city. But the point is, of course, if that was important to you and you wanted to live in the city, you will certainly have access to that as well. And finally, the last factor I'll kind of talk about is convenience and parking. You know, for me, like I said, I'm a realtor, and convenience and transportation is really important. I need easy access to all highways, including the Pike, which goes east-west. I need easy access north-south, so 93, 95. And I can get that in the city, right? Basically, all highways essentially go through Boston, so it's really easy for me to hop on any highway. If you're gonna be living out in the burbs, chances are it's probably not gonna be as easy to get around. I mean, certainly possible. When I was in Newton, you know, I would still drive all over town, just took a lot longer. You know, so if you're gonna live in the burbs, you'll either probably be close to the Pike, which again goes east-west, or if you live North Shore or South Shore, you'll have access to 93 or 95. So if that's something that's going to be important for you, that's another factor to consider in terms of being easily getting around the greater Boston area. And finally, parking. I know I mentioned that. So parking, yes, is a factor as well. In the city, I won't lie, it can be a pain in the butt sometimes, right? Especially if you don't have off-street parking with your condo. You know, it sometimes takes a couple of rounds to find a street parking space around the city. It can take anywhere from 2 minutes and to as long as maybe 5-10 minutes. Just kind of depends on what neighborhood you are and what time of day it is. But that's certainly something you got to consider, right? Because in the suburbs, it's obviously a lot easier to kind of maneuver that. So if you're someone that doesn't really want to deal with that, that's certainly a factor to consider. But if you don't really care, or if you're okay, you know, if you're okay dealing with that aspect of it to live in the city, that's just something you're gonna have to consider. So hopefully that was helpful, guys. Like I said, this was kind of my raw ideas about my pros and cons about living in the suburbs versus the city. You know, like I said, I've had experience now living in both, and I thought I'd kind of just share these opinions with you in case you're still kind of struggling or trying to make up your mind yourself about where you would prefer to live in the Boston area. So hopefully that makes sense. If you guys have any questions, any comments, just shoot them below.